Meeting the love of their life, eloping, and getting married is something that most teenage girls dream of. Caroline Crouch was no different. A young girl in high school, only 15 years old, was flattered by a financially well-off 27-year-old pilot who flew his helicopter over her school, winning her heart. The two eloped and got married, but what seemed like the perfect fairy tale love story would soon turn into a murder that fooled the world. On Tuesday, May 11, 2021, at 4:30 a.m., a man named Haralambos Koutopoulos, also known as Babis, was horrifically awakened from bed. At the time of the incident, he had rented a two-story maisonette in the suburbs of Glyfada, an area located on the outskirts of Athens, Greece. Babis didn't have much time to retaliate, as three men, concealing their identity with hoods, scuffled and overpowered him. They were armed with pistols and wasted no time in tying up Babis and afterward blindfolded him with duct tape. He couldn't do much as the intruders then went after his wife, a 19-year-old girl named Caroline Crouch. This entire incident woke up their 11-month-old daughter, who was sleeping nearby. The intruders, with Greek and Albanian accents, repeatedly asked where the money was. Caroline didn't know that what appeared to be a robbery would turn into her own murder. Caroline Crouch was born to retired engineer David Crouch and Susan Della Costa on July 12, 2001, in Athens. When she was just 8 years old, the family relocated to the island of Alonissos, the place where she had grown up. They moved because both David and Susan had fallen in love with the coastal surroundings. From a very young age, Caroline embraced her beachside life. She was passionate about both scuba diving and swimming. She had met her future husband Babis during a Good Friday parade in 2017. At the time, Babis was a commercial helicopter pilot, and Caroline was only 15 years old. 3 years later, both of them got married in Portugal on July 15, 2019. A few days prior to her murder, Babis and Caroline had purchased a plot of land. Both had plans to build their dream house on the land for themselves and their infant daughter. To facilitate purchasing the land, Caroline had received $50,000 as a gift from her parents. As for the construction costs, the couple had around $10,000 hidden away in their house. The public in Greece at the time didn't rely much on banks, as they were at continuous risk of facing bankruptcy. In light of such circumstances, it was common for the general public to have cash stashed away in their house as it was deemed a safer option. Caroline probably had a similar perspective for storing cash, and by no means would have anticipated what would happen on May 11th. In a cry for help, both Babis and Caroline, alongside their daughter, were tormented with fear as the intruders asked about the money. In an attempt to end the abyss that had befallen them, Babis told them exactly where the money was hidden, a location that's deemed rather unconventional. The intruders opened the Monopoly board game box and took all the money Babis and Caroline had stashed away for their dream house, but they didn't leave. Each one of them kept roaming from room to room as they snatched jewelry and other items of considerable monetary worth. The looters wanted more, but Babis and Caroline had given up all they had. In desperation and fear, they begged for their lives and that of their daughter. Babis could hear the screams of his wife as the intruders held a firearm against the 11-month-old infant. Although blindfolded, he fought continuously against the restraints. However, the rope around his neck was tightened to the extent that he kept fainting in and out of consciousness. He eventually fainted and then regained his senses after a while. Once conscious, he discovered that the men had left the house. At that moment, the only thing he could hear was the painful cries of his infant daughter. In about 30 minutes or so, Babis was able to get close to his mobile phone and dial emergency services using his nose. As soon as the call connected, Babis cried out for help, asking emergency services to send an ambulance and give them his location. Given that he had duct tape around his mouth, the entire call was filled with muffled words. The operator on the other end asked Babis to explain what happened, but "robbers came in" was all he could say. An hour and a half had gone by since the intruders had broken into Babis and Caroline's residence. First responders arrived at the scene around 6 a.m. As they raced up the front steps to enter the house, what they saw could only be defined as horrific. Inside, the living space and kitchen had been completely destroyed. The drawers were open and empty, with clothing and other belongings scattered across the entire space. Among them was an open Monopoly box, the same box in which Babis and Caroline had hidden the money. First responders also found a security cam on the living room couch. It appeared as if it had been ripped off the walls. While the camera was lying on the couch, its memory card was missing. From the staircase hung the corpse of a white and brown husky puppy who had been strangled with her own leash. Baby's was found on the floor of the main bedroom. His eyes and mouth were covered in duct tape that reached his neck, and restraints kept his hands and feet behind his back. On the bed, lying face down, was Caroline Crouch. Their infant daughter was beside her, crying and clapping as she pushed her mother in an attempt to wake her up. Caroline was declared dead. Their daughter, while in evident distress, appeared to be unharmed. First responders, however, were quick to observe Caroline's pale skin and determined that she had been murdered. Baby's went into visible shock when he was freed from his restraints and saw the corpse of his wife, the woman he'd been in love with for the past 5 years. The officers were quick to ensure the safety of the infant and began to interrogate Babis based on his side of the story. In the state of the crime scene, the presence of 4 men was determined. Police officers concluded that 3 men had entered the house while the 4th kept watch. They interpreted the entire sequence of events up to the murder and escape as follows. 1. Intruders approached the house through a dirt road that led to its rear entrance. 2. They failed to break in through the rear door and then removed security pins off a basement window to enter the house. 3. After entering the maisonette, they murdered Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky, with her own leash. 4. The 3 men then entered the main bedroom, where Babis and Caroline were asleep. 5. They damaged the house and took the money out of the Monopoly box. 6. Before leaving, they murdered Caroline by smothering her with a pillow. 7. Since Babis was drifting in and out of consciousness, the intruders may have assumed he died and left, believing they had left no witnesses behind. As far as Caroline's death is concerned, it was revealed that it was not an instant experience. The 20-year-old female suffered an attack that lasted for around 6 minutes. Bruises across her body showed signs of retaliation, and those on her lips and tongue hinted at the possibility of sharp objects being used. No signs of sexual assault were found. Although the damage done to the couple's house was immense, no concrete evidence was left behind by the intruders. The only thing that emergency first responders found in the house was the hood of one of the intruders. Based on how Babis had described the event, it was concluded that the hood must have fallen while Babis was retaliating. This may have been a small piece of evidence for a case of such magnitude, but the hood falling off was enough for Babis to get a glimpse of the culprit. A sketch depicting an overweight, dark-skinned, tall individual was created based on the details Babis shared. Despite being disoriented, Babis was able to identify 2 firearms that were used as well. According to him, the intruders had a black pistol and a silver Colt. Details of the investigation revealed that the intruders were able to escape with $10,000 in cash and jewelry worth $20,000. Additionally, police concluded that this was the work of professional criminals who had observed the family and waited for the right moment to strike. Furthermore, a police spokesperson stated it was brutal and violent and went on to categorize it as an act of someone with a lack of emotions and a strong antisocial personality. Numerous speculations soon followed as details of the investigation provided more insight into the murder. A key trail of thought in everyone's mind was that if money was the motive, why was murder necessary? Some other speculations put forth claims such as the intruders were high on drugs and could not control their actions. Or maybe Caroline saw or knew them. Caroline resisted and fought back, given that she was a black belt kickboxer and the intruders had to silence her to keep her under control. While all of this was mere speculation, the investigators were certain about one thing. The attack was premeditated. The reason for such an assumption was that the intruders knew the couple had money hidden in the house. Based on this assumption, the police questioned Babis and Caroline's inner circle. They believed that the gang had been given a tip. Alongside these interrogations, forensic police officers went door to door, gathering CCTV footage from across the neighborhood to identify the intruders. Within days, the sketch of the suspect babies identified was circulated across news outlets and public places. Alongside this, a $300,000 reward was offered for any information leading to the capture of the murderers. The community came together to help solve the murder of Caroline Crouch. Meanwhile, detectives from the Homicide Division gathered every possible detail from Babis, who would walk them through every detail of the entire ordeal that lasted almost 90 minutes. In an attempt to gain more evidence, investigators put every aspect of the murder under the microscope. The following was scrutinized. 1. The smartwatches Caroline and Babis were wearing. This was to ascertain if their heart rate readings could reveal anything. 2. The CCTV footage that was collected. 3. The couple's phones. Amidst this chaos, Caroline's body was flown to Alonissos. Her funeral service took place on May 14, 2021, on the island she had grown up on. With the funeral service held, Caroline was put to rest. In attendance was her husband, alongside other friends and family members. While at the service, Babis carried their infant daughter in his arms. He stood beside his deceased wife's coffin and placed his hand on her casket to bid farewell. Once the funeral service was over, Babis had to return to Athens for a police lineup of suspects. It was the 17th of May, 2021, and a helicopter was arranged to take him from Alonissos to the police station in Athens. While Caroline's family and friends mourned her, they were completely unaware of the truth. Babis Koutopoulos, who had kept up his act of a devastated widower, would soon be arrested as the prime suspect for Caroline Crouch's murder. Caroline's mother, Susan, had arranged the helicopter for Babis so he could reach Athens. Throughout this journey, Babis continued to talk to both Caroline's parents and the media. He had assumed that his crime was one that could not be solved. At the same time, Babis had full support from Caroline's parents. In an interview, Caroline's father stated that Babis had not only lost his wife, but was also the victim of a horrible crime. He referred to Babis as a kind man who had good intentions and always cared for his daughter. Susan and David could never have imagined that Babis was the very man who took away the life of their daughter. By the time Babis reached the station, the evidence against him was undeniable. Initially, detectives believed Babis to be a grieving husband who had lost his wife in a violent act. At that time, there was no evidence that pointed towards him being the perpetrator. He had provided all the necessary details during questioning and cooperated in every way possible. This led the detectives to the belief that Caroline's murder was the result of a burglary gone wrong. But forensic evidence completely flipped the investigation in a different direction. The forensic team observed the couple's house once more and checked the broken basement window. Their observations revealed that the break-in had been staged, given that the brake marks were inconsistent with the manner in which Babis had described them. This led to the belief that it was Babis who broke the window to make it appear that an intruder had done it. Forensic investigators then moved on to check the couple's smartwatches, which revealed that Caroline was asleep at the time the intruders broke in. Babis had previously claimed that Caroline was awake and crying in fear. The forensic team examined Caroline's phone and determined she had argued with Babis the night before she was murdered. Caroline had blocked him on one of her messaging apps during this argument. Babis, who was now at the police station, was questioned again by detectives from the Homicide Division. While at the station, they presented the new evidence and inconsistencies, including 1. The timeline of events babies had mentioned, which no longer matched. 2. The broken window, which was now known to be a stage by babies to make it look like an intruder broke in. 3. The CCTVs, whose memory cards were removed to prevent babies from being caught. 4. The biometric evidence from the couple's smartwatches. 5. Caroline's phone. Realizing that his life had been caught in a web of lies, babies had no way to escape. The Greek pilot then confessed to murdering Caroline Crouch, a confession that shocked the nation. Caroline had been dead for around 37 days. Baby's confession completely destroyed the story he had fabricated and sold to the public, the authorities, and Caroline's parents. In his confession, Babis provided the following details. He admitted that he and Caroline argued the night before. The argument continued until the next morning, right before the murder took place. Caroline became enraged at Babis, and she tried to leave the house and go to a hotel. Babis stopped her from leaving the house and said Caroline became violent. Given that the couple's daughter was asleep, Babis did not want the argument to wake her up. This led to him smothering Caroline to death using a pillow. After murdering Caroline, Babis placed their infant daughter beside her body. He then went on to create the staged break-in scenario to make it look like robbers had killed her. During his confession, Babis asked the police to place their daughter under the care of Caroline's parents. It was now clear to both the authorities and the public that Babis had murdered Caroline. The false persona of a man who was completely distraught by his wife's murder had finally crumbled. Babis was taken into custody, where he was provided with a lawyer and charged with the following crimes. 1. False testimony. 2. Staging a crime scene. 3. Animal abuse. 4. Perjury. The charges against Babis grew as more details emerged regarding the lies he had told. From the very start, he had fabricated a completely false story to save himself. This story continued until his eventual arrest. Despite the continued lies, one element that remained true was Caroline's love for her daughter, which Babis couldn't deny. In a statement to the media, he referred to Caroline as a perfect mother who loved their daughter. Babis then pleaded for a lighter sentence so he could be released and raise their daughter. In an interview, Caroline's father described Babis as a weasel for trying to have his sentence reduced. After the trial, Babis was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. The court ruled that he was guilty of planning the crime to the last detail and killing Caroline in a calm state of mind. Caroline Crouch's mother and father are now raising their daughter. Susan refers to her as the only piece of Caroline she has left. The 2021 murder of Caroline Crouch by her husband Babis is a story that shook the world. It left the public with many questions about why Babis would take his wife's life. The murder was so heart-wrenching that the president of Greece even condemned the crime. While the case has come to a close, Caroline Crouch's memory will live on forever.